The great ship of the galactic consensus hung in the silence of space. It was called the Star Treader. Its shape was smooth and flowing, like a stone polished by a river. It looked more like a piece of art than a machine. Inside, the light was soft and the air was warm. Everything was designed for peace and comfort. Senior Examiner Kale watched the main screen. His long, slender fingers tapped a rhythm on the console. A new ship had entered a quiet part of space. Its signal was crude and loud. It was a human ship. The humans were new to the galaxy. They were not yet part of the great galactic consensus. Kale felt a calm sense of duty. His people, the VLR, had not fought a war in 10,000 years. They had grown wise and gentle. They believed all conflict could be solved with talk and understanding. They brought this peace to every new species they found. The human vessel answers, Examiner, a junior officer said. They identify their ship as the Marauder. Kale nodded. The name sounded harsh to his ears. It suggested violence. But he pushed the thought away. First impressions were often wrong. On the screen, the human ship appeared. It was a block of dark metal. It had sharp edges and hard angles. It looked like a tool made only for one job. It did not have the beauty of consensus ships. Kale saw large gun barrels and thick armor plates. It was a warship, no doubt. But to Kale, it seemed simple. A thing of brute force. Open a channel, Kale said. His voice was soft and melodic. The screen changed. The face of a human man appeared. He had dark hair, cut short. His skin was a different tone from Kale's own pale blue. His eyes were a deep brown. He looked calm. He did not smile, but he did not look angry either. I am Captain Jean of the Terran Confederacy vessel Marauder, the man said. His voice was steady. We mean you no harm. I am Senior Examiner Kale of the Galactic Consensus, Kale replied. We welcome you to this region of space. Our purpose is peace and knowledge. We wish to learn about your people. We are also curious, Captain Jean said. It is our custom, Kale explained, to invite new species for a cultural and technological exchange. We board your ship. We study its design. We learn about your biology. It is a first step toward friendship. And perhaps one day membership in our consensus. Kale waited. He expected hesitation. Sometimes new species were nervous. They feared giving away secrets. But Captain Jean did not hesitate. He gave a small, slow nod. We accept your invitation. We welcome you aboard the Marauder. Kale was pleasantly surprised. Perhaps these humans were more open than they looked. Excellent. We will send a team of 5. We will be there soon. The connection ended. Kale felt a flicker of pride. Another species was about to be shown the light of the consensus. They would see how much better life could be without fear, without war. He imagined the humans putting aside their crude warship. They would join the great galactic community. They would learn to build beautiful things, not tools of destruction. Soon, a small shuttle left the Star Treader. It flew toward the human ship. The Marauder grew larger in the viewport. It looked even bigger and more intimidating up close. Kale saw scars on its hull. Marks from battles, he assumed. The ship had a history of violence. The shuttle landed smoothly inside the Marauder's hangar bay. The air inside the human ship was different. It was cooler. It smelled of metal and machine oil. The light was bright and white without any warmth. The door of the shuttle opened. Kale and his team stepped out. They were all VLR, tall and slender. They wore simple, elegant robes. A human was waiting for them. It was a young female. She was small compared to the VLR. She had black hair tied neatly behind her head. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. I am Ensign Tay, she said. She bowed her head slightly. I will be your guide. Her politeness was perfect. But Kale noticed something else. She was completely calm. Her hands were still. Her voice did not waver. Most species showed some nervousness during a first contact. But not this human. She seemed as calm as a deep lake. Thank you, Ensign, Kale said. We are eager to begin. Ensign Tay led them out of the hangar and into the ship's corridors. The halls were wide and gray. Everything was functional. There were no pictures on the walls. No decorations. Panels with wires and pipes ran along the ceilings. The crew they passed moved with purpose. They glanced at the aliens, but showed no surprise or fear. They just nodded and continued with their work. Kale's team began their work. They used small scanners to record everything. The structure of the ship, the materials, the energy readings. Your power core is very large, Kale noted, looking at his own scanner. But your energy output is modest. Why is that? Ensign Tay smiled a small, polite smile. It is a design for reliability, Examiner. We believe in having extra power in reserve. Kale found this odd. It was inefficient, but he noted it down. Perhaps humans were not good at managing energy. They moved to the bridge. It was a room full of screens and consoles. The crew sat in their chairs, speaking in quiet voices. Captain Jean stood up from his command chair to greet them. Examiner Kale, Jean said, I hope your examination is useful. It is already very educational, Captain, Kale said. He looked around the bridge. He saw the weapons station. A human officer was sitting there. Your weapons systems seem powerful. They are adequate for our needs, Captain Jean said. His tone was neutral. He did not boast. He did not apologize. Kale's scanner beeped. He looked at it. The readings from the weapons were strange. The guns could fire powerful blasts, but their movement was limited. They could only aim in certain directions. It was a strange design for a warship. Your firing arcs are very narrow, Kale said. A ship could easily fly above you, and you would not be able to shoot it. Captain Jean looked at Kale. His dark eyes were unreadable. That is a limitation of the design. Kale almost felt sorry for them. Their technology was so primitive. Their ship was strong, but it was not smart. It was like a powerful animal that could not think. He was sure now. The Galactic Consensus had much to teach humanity. They could show them how to build better ships, how to live better lives. He felt the benevolent superiority of his people grow. These humans were like children. They were strong, but they did not know the true path. They needed guidance, and Kale was here to give it. Your crew is very disciplined, Kale commented to Ensign Tay as they walked to the next section. Thank you, Examiner, she said. We train for many situations. What situations? Kale asked. All situations, she replied, her voice calm and even. Kale did not press further. He was starting to think these humans were just very simple. They did not have the complex culture of the VLR. They were straightforward. What you saw was what you got. A strong, simple ship. A strong, simple crew. He was sure the rest of the examination would be the same. He would find more examples of their crude but sturdy technology. He would write his report. He would recommend that the consensus welcome humanity. They would be a good, strong member. They could do the physical work that the more delicate species could not. He looked at Ensign Tay's calm face. He looked at the hard, gray walls of the ship. He listened to the steady hum of the engines. Everything seemed to confirm his thoughts. He had no idea that he was walking through a cage, and he had no idea what was locked inside. The tour of the Marauder continued, and Examiner Kale's initial feeling of pity for the humans began to solidify into a quiet certainty. Ensign Tay led them deeper into the ship's belly, her steps quiet and sure on the metal grating of the floors. The VLR examiners glided behind her, their robes a soft whisper against the industrial hum of the human vessel. They entered the engineering section. The room was vast, dominated by the massive cylindrical housing of the ship's primary power core. The air thrummed with a deep, physical vibration that Kale could feel in his bones. A human in a dark blue jumpsuit, his face smudged with grease, was hammering a pipe with a heavy metal tool. The loud clang echoed in the space. Kale flinched. Such a crude, physical method of repair was unheard of among his people. The man noticed them and stopped. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving another dark streak. He was older than Ensign Tay, with lines on his face and a direct, no-nonsense look in his eyes. This is Chief Engineer Sue, Tay said. Chief, these are the examiners from the Galactic Consensus. Sue gave a short, sharp nod. Welcome. He did not smile. He looked at the examiners not with curiosity, but with the assessment of a man judging a piece of machinery. Your power core is remarkably large, Chief Sue. Kale began, trying to be polite. The energy signature, however, seems contained. Are you running at reduced capacity for our visit? Sue picked up a large wrench from a nearby cart. No. This is normal. The core has to be big. It needs to handle the load. The load of what? One of Kale's assistants, a young VLR named Ellen, asked. Your propulsion and weapons do not require this much potential energy. Sue looked at the wrench in his hand, then back at Ellen. Redundancy. Safety margins. If one system fails, 3 others can take over. The core has to be ready. He turned and pointed the wrench at a complex set of pipes and wires. See that? That's a secondary plasma conduit. And over there, that's a tertiary coolant loop. Everything has a backup. And a backup for the backup. Kale watched him, fascinated and a little horrified. This was not elegant engineering. This was over-engineering. It was like building a bridge meant to hold a single person out of enough metal to hold a mountain. It was a tremendous waste of resources, born from a deep-seated paranoia. Your people do not trust your own technology? Kale asked. Sue almost smiled, a quick, hard twitch of his lips. We trust it. We just know it can break. It's better to be ready. Ensign Tay gently guided them away from engineering. They moved into the crew quarters. The contrast was stark. After the loud, powerful engineering section, the living areas were silent and bare. The corridors were lined with identical, gray metal doors. Tay opened one. The room inside was small. It held a single, narrow bed, a small desk, and a single locker. There were no personal items, no pictures, no decorations. The bed was made with tight, military corners. The room was spotless. It looked more like a prison cell than a home. Do your crew not personalize their spaces? Ellen asked, her voice full of sympathy. On our ships, every room is a reflection of the individual's spirit. Ensign Tay looked at the empty room as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Personal items can become projectiles during high-G maneuvers or combat. They can also be a distraction. This is efficient. Kale looked into another room. It was exactly the same. And another. They were all the same. The sameness was unsettling. It spoke of a culture that valued the group over the individual to an extreme degree. There was no comfort here, only function. They passed the mess hall. A few crew members were eating. They sat alone or in pairs, eating quickly and quietly from simple metal trays. There was no lively conversation. No laughter. The food looked like a brown paste and green cubes. It was purely for nutrition, not for pleasure. Kale thought of the meals on the Star Treader, where food was an art form, a social event, a sensory delight. He felt a deep sadness for these humans. They lived in a gray, hard, and lonely world inside their ship. Next, they visited the medical bay. It was clean and well organized, but again it was stark. The tools were simple and physical. Syringes, scalpels, bone saws. Kale's people used sonic healers and cellular manipulators. They rarely ever cut into flesh. The ship's doctor, a woman named Hannah, showed them a device for setting broken bones. It was a sturdy metal frame with clamps and straps. This seems painful, Ellen said softly. Dr. Hannah nodded. It is, but it is effective and reliable. It does not need a complex power source. It will always work. Kale's team continued their scans. The more data they collected, the more the picture of humanity solidified in Kale's mind. They were a species of immense physical endurance and stubbornness. They solved problems by throwing more metal and more power at them. They valued brute strength and reliability over elegance and efficiency. They lived without beauty, without comfort, and without any apparent joy. Their ship was a testament to survival, not to living. They were, Kale decided, like rocks. Hard, durable, and simple. He was explaining this theory to his assistant Ellen as Ensign Tay led them toward the command center for a final review. They have focused all their evolution on resilience, Ellen. They have forgotten the other aspects of an advanced society. Art, philosophy, the joy of existence. Ellen nodded, looking at a crew member who was silently polishing a section of the corridor wall. It is so sad. They are like children who have only learned to build forts. Precisely, Kale said, and it is our duty to gently guide them toward the light. They reached the command center. Captain Jean was there, looking at a star chart. He turned as they entered. I trust your examination has been productive, Examiner Kale, Jean said. His voice was as calm and steady as ever. Very, Captain, Kale said, a note of kindness in his voice. He felt genuinely sorry for this man who commanded such a bleak existence. Your vessel is a remarkable achievement. Its strength and redundancy are impressive. It was not a lie. The ship was impressive in the way a cliff face is impressive. It was a force of nature, unrefined and powerful. Thank you, Jean said. He did not seem to notice the pity in Kale's tone. Or if he did not care. Kale's scanner beeped. It was a soft, high-priority alert. He looked down at the screen. The device had finished its deep-level structural analysis. It had mapped the entire ship, and it had found something. There was a section of the ship that the scans could not penetrate. It was not a large area, but it was centrally located, deep within the most protected part of the hull. The scanner's report displayed a label for the sector, pulled from the ship's own internal network. Sector 0. Status. Lockdown. Access. Negative. Kale frowned. A non-negotiable system? On a ship that was supposedly open for a full technological exchange? This was the first thing that did not fit his theory of the simple, straightforward humans. He looked up from his scanner and met Captain Jin's gaze. The captain's dark eyes were watching him, calm and patient as always. But for the first time, Kale felt a flicker of something else in that look. A warning. A silent, unspoken line that he was not to cross. Captain, Kale said, holding up his scanner. My scans indicate a sealed section of your ship. Labeled Sector 0. Could you enlighten us as to its purpose? The room went very quiet. The soft hum of the ship's systems seemed to grow louder. Ensign Tay, who had been standing politely to the side, did not move. Chief Engineer Su, who had just entered the command center, crossed his arms and leaned against a console. Captain Jin's expression did not change. He looked at Kale for a long, quiet moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and even more measured than before. That, Examiner Kale, is a door that is best left closed, he said. For everyone's safety. The command center of the Marauder was suddenly very still. The quiet hum of computers and the soft rustle of the crew's movements seemed to fade into a heavy silence. Examiner Kale stood with his scanner in his hand, the words Sector 0 glowing on its screen. He had asked a simple, logical question. The answer he received was not logical at all. Captain Jin's face was a mask of calm, but his words were a wall. A door that is best left closed. For everyone's safety. Kale lowered his scanner slowly. He felt a small, cold knot form in his stomach. This was the first thing that did not fit. The humans had been simple, their ship a brute force design. But a secret, a forbidden section? That suggested something more. Something complex. And complexity, in Kale's experience, often meant danger. I do not understand, Captain, Kale said, keeping his voice polite but firm. This is a full technological and cultural exchange. Secrecy goes against the spirit of the consensus. What could be so dangerous that it must be hidden? Ensign Tay was watching him. Her polite smile was gone, replaced by a look of quiet attention. Chief Engineer Su had not moved from where he leaned against the console. His arms were still crossed. He looked like a man waiting for a storm to pass. Some truths are not for sharing, Captain Jean replied. His tone was final. Sector 0 is a non-negotiable part of our ship. It is not a weapon. It is not a treasure. It is a precaution, one we hope never to use. Its purpose is to remain locked. A precaution against what? Kale's assistant, Ellen, asked. Her voice timid. Jin's eyes shifted to her. Against everything. The answer was maddening. It was not an answer at all. Kale's sense of benevolent superiority began to crack, replaced by a growing professional curiosity, tinged with unease. His people had solved the great mysteries of the universe. They had tamed stars and built a peace that lasted millennia. The idea that these simple humans had a secret they could not share was insulting and suspicious. Perhaps it is a failed system, Ellen whispered to Kale as they were finally led out of the command center. Something embarrassing. A design flaw they do not wish us to see. Kale considered this. It was possible. Pride was the emotion his people understood, even if they had moved beyond it. Perhaps the humans were ashamed of some broken piece of their ship. But the look in Captain Jin's eyes had not been one of embarrassment. It had been one of warning. A deep, certain warning. Back in the quarters assigned to them on the Marauder, Kale and his team gathered. The room was as bare and functional as the rest of the ship. It made Kale miss the soft, flowing spaces of the Star Treader. Their refusal is illogical, Kale said, pacing the small room. If it is not a weapon, what is the harm? Our technology can analyze it safely. We can even help them fix it if it is broken. Their entire society is illogical. Another examiner, a male named Rin, said. They hit their machines with hammers. They eat paste. They live in gray boxes. Why are we surprised they have an irrational secret? But that is precisely why we must know, Kale insisted. He stopped pacing and looked at his team. The galactic consensus operates on knowledge and transparency. We cannot recommend a species for membership if they hide parts of themselves. What if this Sector 0 contains something that could threaten the consensus? A disease? A dangerous sai? We have a duty to find out. Ellen looked nervous. He said it was for our safety, Senior Examiner. Perhaps we should listen. He believes it is for our safety, Kale corrected her gently. But his understanding is limited. Ours is not. We have faced and neutralized threats he cannot imagine. We can handle a human precaution. A new resolve settled over him. This was no longer just an examination. It was a test of human honesty, and a test of the consensus's right to know. He would not be intimidated by the grim silence of these people later. Under the guise of continuing routine scans, Kale began his own investigation. He sat in his quarters, a small datapad connected to his more powerful scanner. He focused its sensitive arrays on the area of the ship, his map labeled Sector 0. The exterior scans revealed nothing. It was simply a part of the hull, heavily armored, with no visible doors or conduits. It was like a solid metal heart inside the ship. He tried to scan for energy signatures. The readings were strange. There was a low, steady power flow, but it was unlike the raw power of the engine or the focused energy of the weapons. It was a subtle, complex waveform that his scanner could not classify. He then turned to the ship's data network. The humans had given them limited access to non-essential systems. The library of ship's records, maintenance logs, and communication protocols was open. But every time his inquiry touched the data streams related to Sector 0, it was blocked. Not with a hostile firewall, but with a simple, repeating message. Access to Sector 0 protocols denied. Authorization. Command level Omega only. Kale leaned back, frustrated. Command level Omega, the highest possible clearance. He would never get that from Captain Jean. But he was a senior examiner of the galactic consensus. The VLR had technologies that these humans had never dreamed of. They had encountered digital locks far more sophisticated than this. He opened a small, silvery case. Inside was a consensus-level override device. It was a tool of last resort meant for emergencies. It worked by mimicking the fundamental administrative codes of any known computer system, essentially telling the system, "I belong here. Let me in." Using it on a new species without their permission was a breach of protocol. It was rude, but Kale justified it to himself. The safety of the galaxy was more important than manners. He needed to know what was behind that door. He would take a quick, safe look. Just a peek. Enough to satisfy his curiosity and his duty. Then he would close it, and no one would ever know. He connected the silvery device to his datapad. The screen lit up with the flowing script of his own language. He input the target, the data lock on Sector 0. Senior Examiner, Ellen said from the doorway, her voice worried. Is this wise? Captain Jean was very clear. Clarity born of ignorance is not a virtue, Ellen, Cale said, not looking up from his work. We have a responsibility that goes beyond their fears. We must see. His fingers hovered over the final command. For a moment, he saw Captain Jin's calm, warning face in his mind. He heard the words. For everyone's safety. He pushed the thought away. His people had achieved peace through knowledge, not through hiding from the dark. He would bring light to this human secret. He pressed the button. The device emitted a soft, pulsing light. On his datapad, lines of code scrolled rapidly. He watched as his override sliced through the human security protocols. The denial messages vanished. For a single, triumphant second, he saw a new screen appear. It was a system status menu for Sector 0. He saw a single, large button on the virtual interface. It was labeled in the human language. He had learned a little of it. He could read the words. Protocol. Caged lion. Status. Standby. Activate. Y/N. He didn't understand what it meant. But he knew he was in. He had done it. He had accessed the human secret. And in that moment, a deep, resonant alarm began to blare throughout the Marauder. It was not a polite chime. It was a harsh, screaming sound that tore through the silence. The white lights in the corridor outside his room snapped off. They were replaced by a pulsating, blood-red glow. The synthetic voice of the ship's computer spoke, its usual calm replaced by a chilling, amplified monotone that echoed from every wall. Sector 0 breach detected. Lockdown compromised. Activating protocol. Caged lion. Cale's datapad screen went black. The silvery override device sparked once, and then melted into a useless lump of metal. He sat frozen in his chair, the screaming alarm filling his ears, the red light staining his blue skin. He looked up and saw Ensign Tay standing in his doorway. She was not running. She was not panicked. She just stood there, looking at him. And on her face was no longer politeness, no longer quiet attention, but a look of profound and terrible pity. You should not have done that, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Yet he heard it perfectly over the shrieking alarm. The world dissolved into a nightmare of red light and screaming sound. Examiner Cale was frozen in his chair, the melted ruin of his override device smoking gently on the table. The pulsating red glow from the corridor painted everything in the room in shades of blood and shadow. It strobed across the terrified faces of his team, their elegant robes looking strange and out of place in the chaos. Ensign Tay stood in the doorway, a still figure in the storm. Her words hung in the air, more terrifying than the alarm. You should not have done that. What is happening? Cale shouted over the noise, his voice cracking. The calm, superior examiner was gone, replaced by a frightened being. What is this protocol? Tay did not answer immediately. She stepped fully into the room, and the metal door slid shut behind her with a heavy, final clunk. The sound of the lock engaging was louder than the alarm. They were trapped. The caged lion is not a weapon you fire, she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the shrieking. It is a cage you open. As she spoke, Cale's medical scanner, which was still active on his wrist, began to beep frantically. He looked down. The device was monitoring the life signs of the human crew. The readings were going crazy. The steady, rhythmic heartbeats of the crew were slowing. Drastically. From a normal human rate of around 70 beats per minute, they were dropping. 50, 40, 30. They settled into a deep, slow, powerful rhythm that was more like a hibernating bear than a human. Their body temperatures were also falling. But it was the brainwave scans that made Cale's blood run cold. The chaotic, individual patterns of thought, the squiggly lines that represented fear, curiosity, focus were smoothing out. They were synchronizing. Dozens of separate lines on his screen were merging, harmonizing into a single, terrifyingly coherent waveform. It was as if every human on the ship was becoming a single mind. "What is it doing to you?" Ellen whispered, her large eyes wide with horror as she stared at her own scanner. "It is not doing anything to us," Tay corrected her. Her own breathing was slow and deep. Her eyes, which had always been alert, now seemed to look through them, focused on something far away. "It is stopping us from doing things to ourselves. It is removing the limiters." "Limiters?" Kale asked, his mouth dry. "Every child learns to control their anger," Tay said, her voice taking on a distant, almost teaching quality. "To quiet their fear, to focus their thoughts. You have emotions. You feel a burst of rage, but your mind, your society, tells you to calm down. You control it." She took a slow step forward. The red light flashed in her dark eyes. "Our evolution took a different path. The things we felt, the rage, the fear, the predatory focus, were too powerful to simply control. They were weapons that would destroy us from the inside. So, long ago, we built cages for our own minds. Psychological locks. The Caged Lion Protocol is the key that unlocks them." A new voice filled the room, coming from the ship's comm system. It was Captain Jean, but it was not his voice. All the calm patience was gone. It was stripped down to a core of pure, absolute will. It was the voice of a mountain speaking. It held no emotion, only command. "All crew, condition confirmed. The field is clear. The threat is internal. Stand by." "The threat?" Rin, the other examiner, cried out. "We are not a threat. We are scientists." Tay turned her gaze to him. The pity was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something ancient and cold. "You broke the lock on the cage. You introduced an unknown variable. That is the only threat that matters now. Your intentions are irrelevant." Kale's scanner chirped again. He looked down. The synchronized brainwave pattern was intensifying. The harmonic frequency was increasing, focusing on a single, overwhelming purpose. He couldn't understand what that purpose was, but the sheer, concentrated will behind it was a physical pressure in the room. He felt like he was standing at the bottom of the ocean, with the weight of all the water above him pressing down. He suddenly understood. The oversized power core. It wasn't for the engines or the guns. It was a backup, a power supply for this. For the immense psychic energy being unleashed from the crew. The narrow firing arcs of the weapons? They were a lie, a distraction. The real weapon had been the crew all along, sitting quietly in their chairs, their true potential locked away behind walls in their own minds. The humans hadn't built a warship. They had built a transport for the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Themselves. The screaming alarm stopped. The sudden silence was more deafening than the noise had been. In the absolute quiet, broken only by the panicked breaths of the Velar, a new sound began. It was a low, deep thrum that seemed to come from the very metal of the ship itself. It was the sound of the Marauder's power core diverting all its immense energy, not to engines or shields, but to the crew, to feeding the unleashed thing they had become. Kale looked at Ensign Tay. The polite, unassuming guide was gone. In her place stood a predator. Her body was relaxed, but it was the relaxation of a coiled spring. Her eyes held an intelligence so sharp and focused it felt like it could cut him. He finally understood the terror. It was not a weapon to be fired. It was not a monster to be seen. The terror was the realization that the peaceful, simple people he had been pitying were a mask. Underneath was a consciousness so powerful and so dangerous that they had to build prisons inside their own skulls to function in a society. And he, in his arrogance, had let them out. The voice of Captain Jean came over the comm again, that same terrible, willful voice. "Examiner Kale, the protocol is active. The limiters are off. You are now in the presence of what we really are. Do not move. Do not speak. Wait for the all clear." In the flashing red light, Kale and his team did exactly as they were told. They were no longer examiners. They were prey, waiting in the dark to see if the hunter would pass them by. The silence in the locked room was absolute. The red light continued to pulse, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of danger. Examiner Kale and his team did not move. They did not dare to breathe too loudly. Ensign Tay stood by the door, a statue in the bloody light. She was no longer looking at them. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she was listening to a sound only she could hear. Kale's eyes were fixed on his wrist scanner. The synchronized brainwave patterns of the human crew were now a single, solid, terrifying line. It was a wave of pure, undiluted focus. He saw their heart rates, still at that deep, slow, hibernating pace. Their bodies were conserving every ounce of energy, diverting it all to the mind, to the single, shared mind they had become. Then the data on his screen changed. The harmonic frequency of the brainwaves shifted. It intensified, sharpening to a needle point. It was no longer just a state of being. It was an act. The crew was doing something. A low groan echoed through the ship. It was not the sound of metal straining. It was deeper, more organic. It was the sound of the ship itself protesting, of its very atoms being stressed. The deep thrum of the power core grew louder, vibrating through the deck plates and into the bones of the VLR. "What are they doing?" Ellen whimpered, her voice a tiny, broken thing in the vast, silent dread. Tay's eyes, distant and cold, flicked towards them. "They are looking," she said simply. "Looking for what?" Kale whispered, his throat tight. "For you," she replied. A wave of cold disbelief washed over Kale. "That's impossible. Our ship, the Star Treader, is cloaked. It is hidden by a field that bends light and sensors. It is completely undetectable." It was one of the consensus's proudest achievements. They had no need to hide from anyone, but the technology was a masterpiece of peaceful science. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Tay's lips. It held no warmth. It was the smile of a shark. "They are not using sensors." The groaning sound from the ship intensified. The red lights flickered for a second. On Kale's scanner, the power output of the Marauder's core spiked to a level he would have thought impossible. It was enough energy to vaporize a small moon, and it was all being channeled inward, into the crew. Then, a new sound started. It was a voice, but it was not coming from the comm system. It seemed to come from the air itself, from the vibrating metal of the walls. It was a chorus of whispers, thousands of them, all speaking in perfect, chilling unison. It was the voice of the entire crew, their physical throats silent, but their combined will-given sound. There. The single word was not loud, but it had weight, pressed against Kale's mind. He gasped, clutching his head. It felt like a needle driven into his thoughts. On the main view screen of the room, which had been dark, an image flickered to life. It was a view of space from the Marauder's external cameras. There was nothing there, just the black void and distant stars. Then, the space itself seemed to warp. It shimmered like heat haze on a desert. The beautiful, graceful form of the Star Treader wavered into existence. Its cloaking field had been utterly and completely pierced, not by a scan, not by a trick of physics. It had been seen, by a will that refused to acknowledge its invisibility. The whispered chorus spoke again. "Assessment. No hostile intent. No threat. Stand down." As quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The deep thrum of the power core faded back to its normal hum. The groaning sound from the ship's structure ceased. The pulsating red lights vanished, and the normal, bright white lights returned, making the VLR blink in the sudden glare. The change in Ensign Tay was instantaneous. She took a deep, sharp breath, as if coming up for air. The distant, cold look in her eyes melted away, replaced by a profound exhaustion. The predator was gone, and the young woman was back. She leaned against the wall for a moment, steadying herself on Kale's scanner. The single, unified brainwave line shattered back into dozens of individual, chaotic patterns. The crew's heart rates began to climb back to normal. The immense pressure in the room was gone. The silence that remained was just silence, not a terrifying void. The door to their room slid open with a soft hiss. Captain Jean stood in the doorway. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had just carried a tremendous weight. The unshakable will was gone from his voice, replaced by a deep, bone-weary resignation. The protocol is concluded, he said. The lockdown is lifted. Kale could only stare. His body was trembling. He looked from Jean to the viewscreen, where the Star Treader hung, fully visible and utterly vulnerable. They had been found. Not by technology, but by a force he had no name for. You saw our ship, Kale stammered. You looked through your cloak. We did not look through it, Jean said, his voice low. We told the universe it was not there. And the universe agreed. The simplicity of the statement was more terrifying than any complex explanation. It was not science. It was something else. Something older and more fundamental. Jean stepped into the room. His eyes fell on the melted ruin of Kale's override device. He did not look angry. He looked sad. You thought we were simple, Jean said. You thought our ship was a blunt tool. You were right. It is a tool. But the tool is not the guns or the engines. The tool is us. And its purpose is not to fight wars. It is to end them. It is to end anything that threatens our survival, before it even begins. He looked directly at Kale, and the examiner saw the ghost of the will that had spoken through the ship just moments before. You have now witnessed the terror we cage inside ourselves. The lion is back in its box. This time, he gestured toward the door. It is time for you to go. Your examination is over. The walk back to the hangar bay was the longest of Examiner Kale's life. The bright white lights of the Marauders' corridors felt harsh and accusing. The crew had returned to their duties. They moved with the same quiet purpose as before. But Kale saw them differently now. He did not see simple, sturdy people. He saw walking prisons. Each one contained a monster of unimaginable power, now safely locked away again. Their politeness was not simplicity. It was immense, terrifying self-control. No one spoke to them. Ensign Tay and Captain Jean led the way, their silence a wall. The VLR examiners huddled together, their elegant robes feeling like foolish costumes. They were no longer benevolent teachers. They were children who had stumbled into a room full of sleeping tigers and had poked one with a stick. They reached the hangar bay where their shuttle waited. It looked small and fragile next to the brutal strength of the Marauder. The sight of it filled Kale with a desperate need to be gone from this place. Captain Jean stopped and turned to face them. He looked tired, but his gaze was clear. He looked at Kale and then at each of the other shaken examiners. You will return to your ship, Jean said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the vast space. You will take what you have learned back to your people. Kale found his voice. It was a dry, cracked thing. What are you? It was the only question that mattered. Jean was silent for a moment, looking at the metal floor as if choosing his words with great care. We are what's left, he said finally. He looked up and his eyes were old. Long ago, our world was different. It was not a kind place. The things that lived in our dark were not like the peaceful beings you know. They were nightmares made of tooth and shadow. They hunted us. They preyed on our minds. To survive, we had to become worse. We had to become the most terrifying thing in the dark. He took a step closer to Kale. The galaxy you live in, Examiner Kale, is a gentle one. You built a society of peace because you could. We built what you see. He gestured around the hangar. Because we had to. This ship, our technology, it is not for conquest. It is a leash. For the thing we became to survive our own home. Kale understood. The truth was a cold stone in his gut. The oversized power core, the redundant systems, the stark living quarters. It was not a sign of primitive technology. It was the opposite. It was the design of a species that knew, with absolute certainty, that everything could and would go wrong. They were always ready for the end of the world because, for them, it had already happened. The caged lion, Kale whispered, is the part of us that won that war, Jean finished. The part that can look at a star and tell it to go out. The part that can see the invisible and unravel the impossible. It is a tool of absolute final violence. It is not meant for a universe like yours, so we keep it locked away. We live our simple lives. We pretend to be the blunt, sturdy people you thought we were. It is easier for everyone. Jin's eyes held a deep, unending sadness. The Marauder is not a warship. It is a watchtower. We patrol the quiet edges of space not to fight your wars, but to make sure that the things we fought, the old nightmares from our dark, never find their way to a gentle galaxy that would not survive them. The final piece clicked into place in Cale's mind, and the picture it formed was terrifying in its compassion. These weren't monsters. They were guardians. They had become monsters themselves to keep the real monsters away from everyone else. They bore this terrible burden alone, letting other species believe in a peaceful galaxy, never knowing what guarded its borders. "Go now," Jean said softly. "Remember us, and remember the closed doors." Cale and his team practically fled into their shuttle. The journey back to the Star Treader was a blur. When they landed, the warm, scented air of their ship felt wrong. The soft lights and flowing walls seemed fake. A delicate lie. He went straight to the command deck and looked at the main screen. The Marauder was still there, a silent, dark shape against the stars. As he watched, its engines glowed with a soft blue light. It turned with a slow, deliberate grace and moved away. It did not head deeper into consensus space. It moved back toward the empty, dark fringe from which it had come. Returning to its watch. Cale's superior, a wise old Velar named Emwael, approached him. "Senior Examiner Cale, your report? Are the humans suitable for integration?" Cale turned. His hands were still shaking. He looked at the faces of his crew, their expressions full of peaceful curiosity. They lived in a universe without fear. He thought of Captain Jin's tired eyes. He thought of the whispered chorus that could peel back reality. He made a decision. It was the first truly difficult decision of his life. "The humans are a resilient species," Cale said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Their technology is crude but functional. They are, however, deeply insular and value their privacy above all else. They have declined membership in the consensus at this time." Emwael looked surprised. "They declined? How unusual. But their potential for growth." Cale looked back at the screen. The Marauder was now just a speck, disappearing into the endless night. A cage, sailing into the dark, so that everyone else could live in the light. "They have reached the limit of their growth," Cale said, the lie feeling heavy on his tongue. "They are a simple species. They pose no threat, and they seek no friendship. It is best, for everyone, if we simply leave them alone." He would file a report full of half-truths and omissions. He would recommend this sector of space be declared a neutral zone, to be avoided. He would do everything in his power to make sure the galaxy never bothered the humans again. They had seen the terror beyond comprehension, and the greatest terror of all was knowing that the galaxy's gentle peace depended entirely on the continued, silent patience of the caged lions, watching from the dark.